Have you ever found yourself confused about which annotation to use in your Android development? It can be tricky, right? If you're wondering whether to use @requires API or @target API, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into the differences and exploring real use cases for each. I totally get it. Many developers prefer @requires API because it feels newer and more robust. But you're not alone in questioning its practical applications compared to @target API. This is a common dilemma in the Android development community. Here's the specific question we're addressing today. One user asked, is there any real use case where @requires API is more useful than @target API? This is a great question and one that many developers ponder. Let's explore this together. To understand the difference, we need to look at what each annotation does. @target API is used to suppress warnings for API levels that your code might not support, while @requires API indicates that a method requires a specific API level to function. This distinction can be crucial in certain scenarios. And stick around. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of when to use each annotation, plus a practical example that might surprise you. To understand the difference between @requires API and @target API, let's first look at what each annotation does. The user should know that @requires API is used to indicate that a method requires a specific API level to function correctly. In contrast, @target API is used to suppress warnings about using methods that are not available on lower API levels. However, it does not enforce any checks at runtime. Now let's discuss a real use case where @requires API is more beneficial. For example, if the user is implementing a feature that uses a method introduced in API level 21, they can use @requires API to ensure that the method is only called on devices running API level 21 or higher. If the user were to use @target API instead, the method could still be called on devices running lower API levels, leading to potential crashes. This is why @requires API is preferred in scenarios where API level enforcement is critical. In summary, while both annotations serve to manage API level compatibility, @requires API provides a safer approach by enforcing checks at runtime, making it more useful in certain scenarios. Fun fact: did you know that the Android API has evolved so much that some features are only available on devices released in the last few years? It's like a tech time capsule. Now, let's look at the answers provided by other users. One user highlights that @requires API is clearer in its documentation compared to @target API. They point out that @requires API can be applied to fields, which @target API cannot. This allows for more flexibility in specifying API requirements directly on fields. Here's a pro tip. Always check the official Android documentation for the latest updates on API levels and features. This can save you a lot of headaches down the line. And there you have it. Now you know when to use @requires API versus @target API. Remember, understanding these annotations can help you write better, more efficient code. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe for more tips and tricks.